Garages are within 5 feet of the property line. They're usually 2 feet off the property line, therefore you cannot go up a second story. Even if you could go up a second story, structurally, the garage foundation wouldn't be suited for that. You'd have to redo the foundation, therefore obviating or deleting any value you could get out of quote-unquote converting it, because you'd have to do a new foundation. So it's not really good for that type of thing. But if you're doing a true garage conversion where you're just taking the existing structural shell, converting it to habitable space, it can work out well. Now in this ADU, on the upper right-hand corner, the builder is here today. Raise your hand. So in this case, they actually were able to add second-story habitable space. So this is kind of like atypical, I would say, but I've seen 2 of his ADUs now that have done this, where they managed to add second-story habitable space on the interior of a garage, and so it can be done. You just need to work with a crafty design builder to do that, and this gentleman is that. So check out this ADU if you want to try to do a garage conversion on your property. Who here is considering a garage conversion on your property? 5 people or so? Cool. All right, so timeline to develop. Any questions at this point? Yeah.
Quick question. So in terms of converting an existing structure into an ADU, how much of that existing structure is going to be susceptible to current building and energy codes?
Yeah, great question. So in Portland, are you in Portland?
Yes.
Okay. So in Portland, you are not subject to current building code if you're doing a true conversion. If you do a bump out from that conversion, you are subject. That new addition is subject to the new building code. The conversion only has to meet R15 insulation, which is amazing. It means you can put in a 2x4 wall, or take an existing 2x4 wall for a garage and just put in R15 bath, and you're good. The foundation doesn't have to have footers. The roof just has to have R15. If you do fancy things like the dormer addition, that might be subject to new building code standards.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to piggyback off that same question, I know you were talking about how trade permits don't necessarily drive the cost of your property taxes, and along with the bill that you referenced where you're allowed to put sinks in new spaces, it just kind of had me wondering, would you be able to essentially convert a garage with just trade permits on improving the space, but then potentially retroactively permit it as an ADU after the fact down the road if you wanted to, for like the sake of economization or?
You can add utility. If your question is, yes, you can add utilities to non-habitable spaces, including sheds or garages. So yes, you can do that. And yes, you could subsequently then convert it to habitable space if you wish to do that. That would be, I'm not exactly sure what the rationale for doing that would be, but yes, you can. And furthermore, if you are doing, oftentimes I'll go in garages that already have drywall put up. You don't even need actually permits to do that. You can insulate and put in drywall without permits. You wouldn't want to do that if you're ultimately going to convert to habitable space, because you would need to then prove subsequently or retroactively that it did meet at least the R15 code installation and that you did all your electrical to code. So oftentimes that work would make it difficult to prove that the work was done to code. So it's probably better, all things being equal, to at least get the permits to convert it to habitable space, unless you're trying to like dodge tax increases at the outset or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For somebody with like a garage that is falling over and the foundation is bad, we're thinking of like rebuilding that. Is there any like code stuff that would prevent us from like building the foundation strong enough for 1.5 story ADU in the future, or 2 story or something?
For an existing garage foundation?
Well, like we're gonna rip out the garage.
Okay.
And put it in that non-ADU right now.
Oh, gotcha. So yeah, you just want to build, as long as you're building a foundation to code, and a to code foundation means that you're going to have an 18-inch stem wall that splays out at the bottom, and you have footers, and those footers are presumably going to be below the frost line. Therefore, when you build a structure on top of it, the building won't heave. That's why they make you put in footers below the frost line, whereas pre-existing garages don't have footers. Nonetheless, just to make this point clear, even though old garages don't have footers, you are nonetheless able to legally convert them to an ADU, as long as you're not changing the structural footprint. But for new construction, you have to always put in footers. This is one of the portions of construction that drives up construction costs. A foundation alone, like a 400 square foot building, is going to cost $15,000, $20,000. So to just ensure that your structure can be built to be 2 stories, I would talk with an architect to make sure that generally the stem walls need to be 6 inches wide. And it's a prescriptive engineering standard, so it should be a pretty typical foundation that you can do that from.
I'm a little bit confused. I talked to a consultant a couple of years ago about garage conversion, and I got stuck with the foundation. He said it wasn't thick enough to make a habitable space.
It was a consultant.
Yeah.
They might have been wrong. Because like the slab is not, this is important.
This is important.
Okay. Yeah, the slab, there is no requirement for the slab actually at all. The only requirements, to the extent there are requirements, are for the perimeter, the load that carry the load-bearing walls. The slab itself doesn't have any code requirement. You can have slope on it, it can be cracked, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah. Not that you would want to have a floor with slopes and cracks, but you are allowed to. But you know, to the consultant's point, perhaps maybe that foundation wall was cracked and it was slumping, and that would not be. It would not be good to throw good money after bad in that case. If you had a slumping foundation, that means if it's actively slumping, nobody should want to work on that because you're going to be throwing $180,000 into converting that space, and all of a sudden, you know, if it slumps further, you're going to get cracked walls, and it's going to screw up with your electrical system. That wouldn't be great. So there's situations where even if you're allowed to convert it, you shouldn't, and so maybe that's what happens here. Okay, so timeline to convert. Another benefit of accessory structures is shown here, this timeline. Notice that he submitted the plans to the city in 3/23. The certificate of occupancy came 4 months or 5 months later in 8/23. 5 months, 4 to 5 months for completion. This prefab ADU submitted in 9/23. Certificate of occupancy in 7 months in 4/24. This, by contrast, was submitted in May of 23, and they're not getting their certificate of occupancy in August 24 because they're still working on it tonight, and they're trying to get it ready for tomorrow in September. So it's actually not 8, it's actually 9. So it's 15 months, not 14 months. So this is an example of the fact that if you're doing new construction, it's a not only more expensive, it's more onerous, it takes longer. I'm not trying to discourage new construction, but I'm just trying to, give you some context for the fact that it takes quite a bit of time to get these things done. Oftentimes, what I say as a rule of thumb is the design will take 3 months, the permitting will take 3 months, and the construction will take 6 to 9 months for new construction. The STC waiver that you've heard me allude to a few times, this stands for the System Development Charges. This is a one-time charge that you pay as a developer of a housing unit. When you're adding a housing unit, the city says, hey, you're adding permanent infrastructural burden to the city's sewer, parks, and transportation systems. Therefore, you, developer, have to help offset the burden that you are adding to our city by paying a one-time tax that you must help to defer those impacts from the future occupants of that building. And of course, you developer, will ultimately sell this property and pass that cost along to the future buyer of that property. And so in 2013, the city said, hey, you know what, we like ADUs, we want ADUs to be, or it was 2010. They said ADU SDC, system development charges, are expensive, they're $8,000 to $12,000, that's what they were in 2010. We want more density and affordable housing in Portland. ADUs will add construction jobs, we want more ADUs built, and they'll be more affordable if we waive SDCs. ADUs already may be added by right, it's not a conditional process, therefore SDCs will be waived. And ultimately, they decided to waive those SDCs indefinitely, but in 2018 they said, we're gonna waive SDCs indefinitely, however, if you want to get that SDC waiver, you must agree not to rent out any portion of your property as a short-term rental for a period of 10 years. So you have to sign a restriction that says, I will not rent out my primary house or my ADU as a short-term rental for at least 10 years. And a short-term rental is defined as a housing unit that's available for rent for less than 30 days, commonly thought of as an Airbnb or a VRBO. But the terminology that's used with the city is accessory short-term rental. So most people who are building ADUs will say, I'm not going to pay that $20,000 SDC fee because I'm spending every last cent that I have to build this ADU. I cannot possibly afford this extra fee on top of that. Therefore, I will sign the SDC waiver and not rent out my property as a short-term rental. Of course, this did have the adverse impact of reducing the number of people who are building ADUs because those people maybe were primarily motivated to build ADUs because of the short-term rental variable. And so why not get an SDC waiver for your ADU? Well, if your primary motivation is to do an accessory short-term rental, then yes, you should pay the SDC waiver, or, as we have discussed now, you can build anything other than an ADU on your property and do a short-term rental. If you build an accessory structure that has a kitchen except for a stove, then you're good. And that stove, as long as you don't put in a hardwired stove, but instead you put in an outlet for a convection oven, a hot plate, a microwave, that's not an ADU by the city standards, and therefore you can legally rent that out as a short-term rental, and it's not a new housing unit because it doesn't have a full kitchen. I know that's a weird loophole, but that's now an option, and that might be why you started to see a decrease in the number of bona fide ADUs. Similarly, you can add accessory kitchens to your basement now without calling it an ADU, not pay the SDCs, and also rent that as a short-term rental. Okay, so that goes through the regulations. The book that I have in the back of the room that's available for sale, print book, is $25 if you want to buy that. There's also a digital version online, $15. I do consultations on people's property that last usually up to 2 hours. They cost $250. They come with a copy of that book. I do that anywhere in the Portland metro area. So if after this tour you want that, feel free to reach out. It's just a one-time service. I'm not involved with the design build process at all. I'm pretty neutral about who I don't refer you to any individual people typically. I just give you kind of all the steps that you need to kind of get started. Hopefully, between this talk and the tour tomorrow, you will feel much more confident about getting started without a consultation, but I am there if you ever would like that. This is the Tiny Hookups Company. Similarly, we do these one-time consultations that cost $100 in the city of Portland. We do not operate outside of the city of Portland because it's only legal here, and then we can do the general contracting for you if you wish. And at this point, I will open it up for questions. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk tonight. You've mentioned a lot of different types, obviously. I didn't hear you mention yet of containerized type of ADUs in Oregon or in Portland. Do you have some comments regarding that?
Yeah, we can talk about, you're asking about container conversions, right? Yeah, Container House is, so there's one company in the Portland metro area called Relevant Buildings. We went there on our tour today, and they do container conversion ADUs. They've done 10 in Portland, and Callie, who's in the back, raise your hand. Callie works for that company, and I would recommend, if you are interested in container conversions, talk to her. I would highly recommend, if you're going to do container conversions, that you work with them, because they're the only people who do it as a matter in a professional way in the area, and it does require a degree of specialization. That's all I'll say about that, and she can tell you a lot more about the permitting process and the costs and all that.
For the structures that are not being permitted as ADUs, that can be anything, just not an ADU, don't have a stove hookup. What were the size requirements for those?
There's really no size limitations on it. I should say accessory structures must have a footprint of less than 900 square feet, but that's pretty enormous for most properties. So effectively, that's the only code barrier. You can build up to 20 feet at the midpoint of the gable, just like an ADU. Has to respect the 5-foot setback, but that's it. I should also mention, as another matter, I don't want to belabor this point too much, but if you build a small detached accessory structure, less than 24 feet by 24 feet in 1 story, it can be within the 5-foot setback. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Tomorrow on the tour, if you want to learn more about that particular provision rather than talking about it here, you can go visit the accessory structure that are the 3 ADUs that were built out of garages are all located within the 5-foot specs, so you can learn more about that.
Hello. I have an essay for you. Okay, so long ago, I took your Earth Advantage class, and I think going into it, dealing with clients and people inquiring about ADU, they wanted to know what the point of the permit was in the first place. And I think the answer mainly was for insurance purposes and just everything's legal. And as I continue to learn and help clients, what I learned from Clackamas County